They were meant to disappear. 91 women and children hidden in the freezing dark of abandoned buildings scattered across Montana. No warmth, no hope, just fear and silence. And no one stopped. Until he did. A battle-scarred German shepherd, abandoned by the world, standing in the snow before a locked door no one else dared to open. What happened next will make you cry and believe in miracles again. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in second chances, if you believe every life is worth saving, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. The wind cut like glass through the streets of Rockford, Montana that morning. It was early December, and the small mountain town wore its winter the way an old soldier wears his scars, without apology, without disguise. Pine trees bowed beneath the weight of fresh snow, their boughs heavy and silent. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from chimneys scattered along the hills. The roads were nearly empty, save for the occasional pickup rumbling past, its tires crunching over the ice. On the far edge of town, away from the tidy storefronts and warm diners, stood the abandoned Rockford High School, a relic of brick and rust. Its windows were clouded with frost, some cracked, others boarded, and the metal gate out front sagged on its hinges. Most people passed it without looking twice, but not him. He stood there as though he had been carved from the cold itself, a German shepherd, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat a black and tan tapestry dulled by the snow clinging to it. One ear stood straight while the other, his left, drooped slightly, as if bent in some long-forgotten fight. A faint scar ran along his right flank, pale against the darker fur, and his amber eyes were deep pools of patience and sorrow. He did not move, not when the wind drove snow into his face, not when the creak of the old sign broke the silence. The people in town had whispered about him for weeks, calling him that dog, the stray, the ghost by the school. But Ryan Cooper knew him as Ace. Deputy Ryan Cooper, 37, was a man whose presence was both unassuming and solid, the way a strong oak can be unnoticed until you lean against it. Tall, with the long frame of someone who grew up working rather than working out, he had short, dark brown hair that had begun to show the first threads of gray near his temples. His blue eyes were the kind that always seemed to be searching for something, trouble, maybe, or truth, and the faint lines on his forehead told of a man who had spent more time outdoors than in, and more time worrying about others than himself. Ryan's uniform was worn but clean, his badge polished, his winter jacket zipped up to his chin. He had been with the Rockford Sheriff's Department for nearly a decade, long enough to know every road, every name, and every story in town, except for the one that belonged to the dog. Ryan had first met Ace on a case the year before, when the sheriff's office responded to a call about illegal fighting pits on the outskirts of town. They'd found dogs in cages, some barely alive, others too far gone. One of them, a younger, leaner version of the dog in front of him now, had stood between the rescuers and a smaller injured pup growling at anyone who came too close. It wasn't defiance, it was defense. And when Ryan crouched down, spoke softly and offered his hand, the shepherd's growl faded. Ryan had seen the intelligence in those amber eyes, the stubborn refusal to give up even when the odds were hopeless. He had called him Ace then, half joking, because in a stacked deck full of bad hands, this dog was the one card that could still win the game. The name stuck. After the raid, most of the surviving dogs were rehomed or taken to shelters. Ace was sent to a temporary holding facility for medical care. But within a week he was gone. The staff said he must have slipped the fence one night, vanishing into the cold. In the weeks that followed, Ryan had heard scattered sightings, a black and tan shepherd slipping between alley shadows, scavenging scraps behind the diner, sleeping curled under the loading dock of the feed store. He'd imagined Ace navigating the edges of the town, avoiding people, surviving on instinct and stubborn will. A dog like that didn't forget kindness, but he didn't forget cruelty either. He'd become a ghost with a heartbeat, living between the world of men and the wild, answerable to no one. Until now. Ryan pulled his cruiser to the side of the road, engine idling, and watched as Ace stood in the snow, staring at the rusted double doors of the high school. His breath made faint clouds in the air, but he didn't shiver, didn't turn his head. It was as though the dog was waiting for something or someone to come through those doors. Ryan stepped out, boots crunching over ice, and called softly, "Ace." The dog's ears twitched, and for a moment he glanced over, recognition flickering in his eyes. Then he turned back to the doors. Ryan reached into the passenger seat, grabbed a paper bag, and pulled out a sandwich. "Figured you might be hungry," he murmured, holding it out. Ace approached slowly, his gait steady but cautious. He took the sandwich, ate quickly, then turned back toward the school, resuming his silent vigil. Ryan frowned. This wasn't random. Dogs didn't guard abandoned buildings for no reason. Somewhere in the shadows of those halls, there was an answer, maybe more than one. Across the street, a figure stopped on the sidewalk, watching the scene. Emily Carter, 32, had a camera slung around her neck, her gloved hands tucked into the pockets of her wool coat. She was of average height but carried herself with a subtle defiance, like someone who had learned not to bow to the weight of other people's opinions. Her blonde hair peeked from beneath a knitted hat, framing a face that was both striking and tired, the face of a woman who had seen the cost of chasing truth. Emily had grown up in Rockford, but left after college to work for a regional paper. A year ago, a misjudged source in an explosive article cost her job and reputation. Now, she was back in the town she once swore she'd never return to, hoping to rebuild her career with stories that mattered. She had been walking past the school on her way to the library when she spotted the scene. The deputy, the dog, the snow, the rusted gate. She lifted her camera and clicked. The sound drew Ryan's gaze, and Emily raised a hand in a small, polite wave. "Didn't mean to interrupt," she called across the street. "Just, looks like a moment worth keeping." Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "Just a dog," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. Emily smiled faintly. "No such thing as just a dog," she replied, and kept walking, though her mind was already turning. She'd heard the talk about the shepherd haunting the school, but seeing him was different. Something about the way he stood there, unwavering in the snow, whispered of a story that was waiting to be told. She didn't know yet that this story would be bigger, darker, and far more dangerous than she could imagine. And Ryan didn't know yet that Ace wasn't just waiting, he was warning. The morning broke in shades of white and silver, the snow still falling in slow, deliberate flakes that seemed to hover in the air before touching the ground. Rockford was quieter than usual, as if the town itself was conserving its warmth, keeping its breath low against the cold. Ryan Cooper's boots made a steady crunch on the icy sidewalk as he approached the old Rockford High School again, his patrol cruiser parked a short distance down the road. The sun was barely up, its pale light doing little to cut through the mist curling around the edges of the building. He could hear the wind pushing through the broken window frames high above, a low, hollow moan. Ace was there, of course he was, standing at his post in front of the rusted double doors. But today, Ryan noticed something new in the dog's posture. The shepherd's head was tilted slightly, his ears swiveling forward, catching something beneath the sound of the wind. Ryan slowed, listening. At first, it was nothing but the creak of old wood and the sigh of cold air slipping through gaps in the brick. Then he heard it, a faint, deliberate tapping. 3 knocks in a row, then silence. 3 more, then silence. Almost like a signal. Ryan's stomach tightened. He stepped closer, trying to pinpoint the direction. The sound seemed to come from deep inside the building, not from the ground floor, but somewhere lower beneath. Then came something else, even fainter, a murmur. Not words exactly, but the unmistakable cadence of a human voice, weak and blurred by distance and walls. Ryan glanced at Ace, and the dog was already looking back at him. The shepherd's ears were pricked forward, his body tense. Then, to Ryan's surprise, Ace took a single step backward, his gaze locked on the door, as if making space for Ryan to move forward. It wasn't retreat, it was an invitation. Ryan crouched next to him. "You're trying to tell me something, aren't you, boy?" he murmured. Ace's tail gave one slow sweep against the snow, but his eyes never left the door. A gust of wind rattled the loose gutter overhead, making Ryan glance up. When he looked back, Ace had shifted his weight, paws pressing into the snow like he was ready to spring forward if needed. Ryan stood, filing the moment away. He needed to know what was behind that door, but without a warrant or clear evidence, he'd be breaking every rule in the book. Later that morning, Ryan stepped into the warmth of the Copper Mug, Rockford's only real coffee shop. The scent of fresh coffee beans and baked bread wrapped around him as the door swung shut behind him. At a corner table, Emily Carter was already sitting with her laptop open, a half-finished latte steaming beside it. She looked up when she saw him, her eyes bright with something between curiosity and determination. Emily had shed her heavy coat, revealing a fitted dark green sweater that contrasted with her pale hair. Her posture was relaxed, but her fingers tapped idly against the ceramic mug, betraying impatience. "Deputy Cooper," she greeted with a small smile. "Or should I say, Ace's friend?" Ryan raised an eyebrow as he approached. "You've been busy asking questions," he said, sliding into the chair opposite her. "Not nearly enough answers," Emily replied. "I keep hearing the same thing. That dog's been camped out in front of the school for weeks. Nobody knows why. But you seem to know him." Ryan sipped his coffee, buying himself a moment. "I've seen him before," he admitted. "A long time ago." Emily leaned forward. "And?" Ryan hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of sharing half-baked theories, especially with someone who had a reputation, however unfair, for burning sources. But the image of Ace stepping back from the door this morning stayed with him. "This morning, I heard something inside the building. Knocking. A voice, maybe." Ace reacted to it. Her eyes sharpened. "You think someone's in there?" "I think something's in there," he corrected. "But I don't have enough to get in legally." Emily's lips curved in a small, knowing smile. "So, you're going back?" Ryan gave her a look that was both warning and acknowledgement. "I have to follow procedure." She didn't miss the implication. "Then I'll follow you," she said lightly, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small, weatherproof video camera. It was an older model but well cared for, with a few scratches on the casing that spoke of long hours in the field. "I know how to keep quiet, and if there's something in there, I'll have proof." Ryan exhaled slowly. "You're not making this easy." Emily shrugged. "I'm not here to make it easy. I'm here to get the truth." From behind the counter, Marla Jennings, the shop's owner, called out a greeting to Ryan. Marla was in her early 50s, her short brown hair streaked with gray, eyes quick and assessing. She'd run the Copper Mug for 2 decades and had the kind of memory that never forgot a face or a rumor. "Heard you were seen with that stray again," she said with a grin. "That dog's got more sense than half the people in this town." Ryan gave her a polite nod. "He's persistent." "Persistent's another word for knowing something," Marla said, sliding a cinnamon roll onto a plate and setting it on Ryan's table. "On the house. You look like you're going to need it." When Ryan and Emily left the cafe, the snow had stopped, leaving the streets coated in a clean, blinding white. The air was still, the kind of stillness that made every sound carry farther than it should. As they approached the school again, Ace was exactly where Ryan had left him, his paws planted firmly in the snow. Emily hung back for a moment, studying him through her camera's lens. "He's beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. The dog's fur caught the pale sunlight, every scar and curve of muscle visible beneath the thick coat. But it was his eyes that held her, the way they seemed to watch everything, calculating, patient, and unbearably sad. Ryan stepped closer to the door, listening again. The tapping came, faint but steady, and this time Emily heard it too. Her breath caught, and she lowered the camera. "That's not the wind," she whispered. "No," Ryan agreed, his voice low. "It's not." Ace gave a low rumble in his throat, not aggressive but alert, and shifted his weight toward the door. Ryan felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Whatever was inside, Ace knew it didn't belong there. And maybe, just maybe, it didn't belong in this world at all. The snow had hardened overnight, leaving a thin crust that crunched sharply underfoot. The air was brittle with cold, the kind that made each breath feel like it could slice the lungs open. Ryan Cooper walked with his collar turned up, his eyes scanning the weather-worn walls of the old Rockford High School. Emily trailed a few paces behind, her camera bag slung across her shoulder, its strap cutting diagonally over her coat. Ace padded alongside Ryan, his paws making almost no sound, his amber eyes flicking between Ryan and the building as though measuring the right moment to show them something. It happened when they rounded the back corner of the building, where the shadow of the gymnasium kept the snow thin. Here the brick was darker, streaked with old water stains. Ace slowed, his tail stiff, and veered toward the far end of the wall. Ryan followed, boots slipping slightly on the icy ground. That's when he saw it. Half hidden by a sagging chain-link fence was a steel hatch set low into the wall, the paint fresh enough to stand out against the weathered surroundings. A heavy padlock hung from the latch, its surface shiny, untouched by rust. Ryan crouched, brushing away the thin layer of frost on the metal. Beside the hatch, the ground was bare, an oval patch where snow should have been, but instead the dirt was flattened, the kind of smoothness made by repeated footsteps. Whoever used this door came often enough to keep it clear. "New lock," Ryan muttered, running a gloved finger over it. Ace sniffed the edge of the hatch, then glanced up at Ryan, a faint whine in his throat. The dog stepped back 2 paces, then forward again, circling the hatch in a deliberate pattern before sitting down directly in front of it. Ryan understood it wasn't just the front doors Ace was guarding. This was the real entry. Emily stepped closer, her breath puffing in the cold. "That doesn't look like something from 20 years ago." "It's not," Ryan said. He straightened and reached for his radio. "Cooper to dispatch. Need a unit at my location. Possible unauthorized access point at the high school." The reply crackled back. "Copy, Cooper. Who's the property owner?" Ryan grimaced. "Town records show it's still listed under the school district, but this door isn't on any original plans." Dispatch promised to send an officer, but when Officer Mark Delaney arrived 15 minutes later, his expression carried a mix of curiosity and irritation. Delaney was in his late 40s, stocky, with a wind-reddened face and a permanent squint from years of patrolling in sun and snow alike. Known for his meticulous approach to procedures, he had the air of someone who disliked surprises. "You know I can't cut that without a warrant," he said, looking at the lock. "Even if it's suspicious." Ryan nodded. "I know, but I wanted it documented." Delaney took photos, measuring the hatch dimensions with a small retractable tape from his belt. "Odd spot for a service door," he remarked, "unless it's for an old utility tunnel." Emily had been silent until then, scribbling in a small leather notebook. Now she spoke. "Utility tunnel, or something else entirely. Did you know the original blueprints showed a sub-basement that connected to other properties?" Delaney raised an eyebrow, his gaze sliding to Ryan. "Where'd you hear that?" "She's been digging," Ryan said, a mix of resignation and appreciation in his tone. The truth was, Emily had spent the previous night at the Rockford Public Library, poring over old microfilm reels and dusty planning documents. In the dim glow of a desk lamp, she'd uncovered a single reference in a 1957 maintenance log to a service tunnel running east from the school grounds to what was then the town's freight warehouse. That warehouse no longer stood, at least not in its original form. Today, it was the headquarters of the Heller Community Relief Foundation, a nonprofit with clean logos, a spotless reception area, and a director whose charm could disarm a room. Victor Heller. Victor Heller was a man in his early 50s with a politician's smile and the sort of wardrobe that made him look equally at home on a construction site or at a charity gala. His public record was pristine, but Emily remembered his name from her days in investigative reporting whispers of offshore accounts, unexplained land purchases, and, most recently, 2 anonymous tips linking him to relocation programs that didn't exist on paper. As Emily recounted her findings to Ryan and Delaney, Ace stayed by the hatch, his gaze fixed, as if daring it to open. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint scent, something metallic and stale. Ryan caught it too. Delaney finished his notes and snapped the last photo. "Without a warrant, we leave it as is," he said firmly. "But I'll log it as a potential hazard. If something's going on down there, we'll find a legal way in." When Delaney left, Ryan stood for a moment in the muffled quiet, his eyes tracing the edges of the hatch. He knew how long warrant requests could take, especially when property ownership was murky and political influence might be at play. And if Heller was involved, time might not be on their side. Emily closed her notebook, her expression thoughtful. "You know he's not going to wait for us to get permission," she said softly, nodding toward Ace. Ryan gave a faint, humorless smile. "No," he agreed. "And neither is whoever's using that door." Ace gave a single bark, short and sharp, as if to punctuate the thought. The sound echoed off the back wall of the school, then faded into the snow-hushed air. The storm had rolled in without mercy, swallowing the town of Rockford under a curtain of white. By nightfall, the streets were nearly empty, save for the steady hum of snowplows pushing against drifts that climbed past the curbs. The wind howled through the alleyways, carrying with it sharp needles of ice that stung any exposed skin. Ryan Cooper stood in the back lot of the high school, snow crunching beneath his boots, his breath a steady cloud in the beam of his flashlight. Ace was at his side, head low, ears forward, his body taut with focus. Ryan had been about to leave for the night when he'd heard it, faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the moan of the wind, but then clearer, cutting through the howl of the storm, a muffled, broken sob. It rose and fell like someone trying not to cry, the sound catching in their throat. Ryan's chest tightened instantly. He didn't need a warrant anymore. This was exigent circumstances. He keyed his radio, his voice steady but urgent. Cooper to dispatch possible person in distress inside the old Rockford High. Need all available units, bolt cutters, and medics staged. Within minutes, the backlot filled with the churn of tires and the sharp beams of headlights cutting through the snow. Officer Mark Delaney was the first to arrive, bundled in a heavy parka over his uniform. His face was red from the cold, his eyes squinting against the wind. Behind him came Sergeant Lydia Morales, the department's senior field officer. Morales was in her early 40s, her black hair tied in a low braid, a scar running from the corner of her right eyebrow to her temple, a remnant from a domestic dispute call gone bad years ago. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor, she was respected in every precinct she'd served. Tonight she was already pulling on insulated gloves before she even stepped out of her SUV. "You're sure you heard it?" Morales asked over the wind. Ryan nodded once. Through the hatch. Delaney handed him the bolt cutters, and Ryan stepped forward, his boots sinking into the drift that had formed against the wall. Ace moved ahead, nose pressed to the metal seam of the door, his breath fogging the surface. The dog's tail was stiff, the fur along his spine raised just enough to signal unease. Emily appeared from the darkness, her hood pulled up over her blonde hair, camera in hand. She was breathing hard, the lens already pointed toward the scene. "You're not leaving me behind," she said, her voice carrying a stubborn edge. Ryan didn't argue. There wasn't time. He braced the cutters against the lock, the steel bitterly cold against his gloves. The first squeeze didn't budge it, so he reset his grip and put his weight into it. With a sharp snap, the shackle gave way, clattering into the snow. The hatch groaned when he pulled it open, a blast of air escaping that was wrong for the weather, humid, heavy, and faintly sour. "Smells like people," Morales muttered, her eyes narrowing. They switched to flashlights, beams cutting into the darkness beyond the threshold. The space inside was narrow enough that Ryan had to angle his shoulders as he moved forward. The walls were raw concrete, beads of condensation catching the light, and everywhere, scratched into the surface, were marks, tally after tally, hundreds of them, climbing from ankle height to as far as his headlamp reached. Between the rows, words had been carved, jagged and desperate. "Help us." Emily's camera clicked quietly, the sound almost respectful in the silence. Her breath was shallow, her gloved hands steady as she filmed each detail. Behind Ryan, Delaney muttered under his breath, the words lost to the storm muffled now behind them. Ace took the lead, his movements measured, as though he'd walked these passages before. His paws made soft sounds against the damp floor, his nose twitching with every step. Every so often he would pause, glance back at Ryan, and then continue turning left where a straight path lay ahead, ducking under a low beam without hesitation. "Feels like a maze," Delaney said behind them. "If you didn't know where you were going, you'd get lost in here quick." Ryan didn't reply. He was too focused on the sound ahead, something faint, rhythmic. Not the sobs this time, but breathing, fast and uneven. He raised a hand to slow the group. Ace froze mid-step, his body angling toward a section of wall where the concrete looked newer, smoother. Ryan stepped forward, running his hand along it until he found the outline of a heavy door, flush with the wall, secured by a chain looped through steel eyelets. Morales moved up beside him. "We cut it," she said simply, and Ryan passed her the cutters. The chain fell with a clatter that seemed to echo far too long. When Ryan pulled the door open, the humid air intensified, wrapping around them like a damp blanket. The beam of his flashlight swept across a small chamber mattresses laid on the floor, thin blankets, and the unmistakable shapes of people huddled together. Eyes blinked at the sudden light, faces pale and gaunt. One woman, no older than 20, flinched as Ryan stepped inside. "It's okay," he said softly, lowering himself to one knee. "You're safe now." Ace moved gently among them, sniffing each person in turn, his tail lowering but wagging slightly, a reassurance in canine form. One girl reached out a trembling hand and touched his fur, her eyes filling with tears. Morales was already on her radio, calling for medics to come in. Delaney began counting softly under his breath. 19, he said finally, his voice tight. Emily stayed in the doorway, her camera lowered now, watching as Ryan and the others helped the women to their feet. She caught Ace's eye for a moment, and something in the look made her swallow hard. It was as if the dog understood exactly what they had found, and why he had waited so long in the snow. The air in the final chamber was heavy and stale, so thick it seemed to cling to the skin. Ryan's flashlight beam swept slowly across the cramped space, illuminating 19 figures huddled together on thin, stained mattresses. They were young. Most looked between 15 and 25, and their eyes tracked the movement of the light with a mix of fear and exhaustion. The sharp smell of unwashed bodies, damp fabric, and something faintly metallic hung in the air. It was the smell of a place where hope had been worn down to its last thread. Morales moved in first, her calm authority filling the space as she crouched to speak softly to the nearest girl. "We're here to get you out," she said, her voice low and steady. The girl, maybe 17 with matted brown hair and a bruise along her cheekbone, blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the words. Delaney started counting heads while Ryan scanned the edges of the room, noting the meager supplies, a few plastic bottles of water, a rusted metal bucket in the corner, and a torn blanket nailed over a crack in the wall to block the cold. Near the far end, a narrow doorway led to a smaller side room. Ace's nose twitched toward it, his body tense but not aggressive, and he padded over, his nails clicking softly on the concrete. Ryan followed him through the doorway and froze. Inside, two small figures sat pressed against the wall, knees drawn to their chests. They were identical 7-year-old girls with pale skin, tangled light brown hair, and matching oversized sweaters that hung off their shoulders. Their eyes were red and swollen, either from crying or the cold, and they clutched each other's hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Ryan crouched down slowly, removing his gloves so his voice wouldn't be muffled by the rustle of gear. "Hey," he said gently, "you're safe now." The smaller of the two by barely an inch glanced at him but didn't speak. The other swallowed hard and whispered, "Are you taking us home?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Before Ryan could answer, Emily appeared in the doorway, having followed the beam of his flashlight. She knelt beside the girls without hesitation, her own camera hanging forgotten around her neck. Emily had grown up with 2 younger sisters herself, and something in the girls' expressions, frightened but defiant, hit her like a punch to the chest. "I'm Emily," she said softly, reaching out a hand but not touching them yet. "And yes, we're going to find your mom. I promise." The twins glanced at each other before the smaller one finally loosened her grip enough to take Emily's hand. It was cold and bony, the skin dry from neglect. Emily shifted closer, gently wrapping both girls in her arms. Her voice was warm, steady, the same tone she used years ago when calming her little sisters after storms. Ace, who had been watching the exchange, stepped forward and lowered himself onto his front paws. He inched closer until his head rested on the lap of the girl closest to him, Ellie, though they would learn her name later. His tail gave a slow, deliberate wag, as if to say he understood. The girl's hand slid into the thick fur of his neck, fingers curling there like she had just found something she didn't know she was missing. Meanwhile, Morales was gently questioning one of the older women in the main room. The woman's name was Kara, 23, with long black hair that had lost its shine under the weeks, maybe months, spent in this place. She spoke in short bursts, glancing often toward the doorway, as if afraid to be overheard by someone who wasn't there. "The man who brings the food, he calls himself Victor. I don't think that's his real name, but that's what we hear. He has keys to the back tunnel. Comes and goes when he wants. Sometimes he's gone for days, sometimes he's here twice in one night." Ryan stepped into the conversation. "You ever see where he comes from?" Kara shook her head. "Only that he comes from the east. Boots always wet when it's raining. Smells like smoke and oil." She paused, her face tightening. "If he knows you found us, he'll move the others. He's got other places." The words landed heavy in the room. Ryan exchanged a glance with Morales, both understanding that this was far from over. Delaney began organizing the women into 2 lines for evacuation, making sure the weakest were supported by the stronger. Emily, still holding one twin on her hip while the other clung to her coat, asked Ryan quietly, "What if their mom is one of the others Kara's talking about?" Ryan didn't have an answer he was willing to say out loud. Instead, he gave her a short nod and said, "Then we keep looking." The climb back through the narrow tunnel was slow, the air growing colder with each step toward the hatch. Snow swirled in through the opening as they emerged into the storm, the medics already waiting with blankets and heaters. The women blinked against the sudden brightness of the floodlights, their steps hesitant on the uneven ground. Emily guided Ellie and Grace toward one of the ambulances, wrapping them in a single thick blanket so they could stay pressed together. Ace stayed close, his body brushing their sides, never once breaking step. When they reached the vehicle, Ellie turned to him and whispered something too soft for anyone else to hear. Whatever it was, Ace's ears pricked, and he pressed his head gently against her shoulder before stepping back. Ryan watched them go, the knot in his chest tightening. 19 people out of however many more were still out there, and somewhere, a man named Victor was walking free in the storm. The storm had eased by morning, leaving Rockford under a pale blue sky and a layer of snow that glittered like crushed glass in the sunlight. The quiet was broken only by the distant clank of a freight train on the tracks east of town. Ryan Cooper stood beside his cruiser, the radio pressed to his ear, listening to the dispatcher repeat an urgent message. An anonymous call had come in, a male voice, muffled and tense, claiming there was something you need to see at a warehouse near the rail yard. The caller hung up before giving more. Ryan knew the place. The building was a low, rectangular structure of corrugated steel, with faded stenciled lettering still visible on one wall from when it had been a shipping depot decades ago. Now it sat mostly idle, except for the occasional use as storage for broken equipment and spare parts. The location was perfect for someone who didn't want to be found close to the tracks, far from regular patrol routes and surrounded by chain-link fencing half collapsed under the weight of years. He arrived with Emily in the passenger seat, her camera on her lap. Ace rode in the back, his head up, gaze fixed forward as though he already knew where they were going. They were met at the site by Sergeant Morales and two other deputies, including Deputy Cole Harmon, a tall man in his early 30s with sandy hair, a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, and a quick smile that disappeared the moment things turned serious. Harmon had a reputation for being light-hearted off-duty, but relentless in the field. The team split to cover the warehouse perimeter. Ryan, Emily, and Ace took the east side, where the snow had been trampled down into an uneven path leading to a side door. As they rounded the corner, the door flew open, and a man burst out late 20s, wiry, wearing a dark hoodie and cargo pants. His eyes widened at the sight of them, and he bolted, boots slipping on the icy ground. Ryan didn't have to shout. Ace was already moving, muscles coiling before he lunged forward. The shepherd closed the gap in seconds, slamming into the runner's legs and bringing him down hard into the snow. The man yelled, thrashing, but Ace had his forearm locked in a controlled hold teeth, gripping without breaking the skin. Ryan was on him a heartbeat later, cuffing his wrists while Morales came up from the opposite direction to secure the scene. A black nylon backpack had spilled open in the fall, its contents scattering over the snow. Among a tangle of gloves and a flashlight was a folded map, edges worn and smudged. Ryan picked it up carefully. Red ink dotted the surface in more than a dozen places, each mark numbered and circled. A crude key in the margin read only, "In, out." Emily stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. These aren't just random spots, these are towns. And not just towns, Morales said, scanning the names. Old industrial sites, most of them. Out-of-the-way places. The suspect, later identified as Lance Dorsey, a small-time hustler with a history of petty theft, refused to answer questions, staring straight ahead with a tight jaw. Ryan had him transported back to the station while the rest of them began cross-referencing the marked locations. 4 of the dots were within an hour's drive of Rockford. The first was the abandoned sawmill 15 miles south, its skeletal frame looming over a frozen creek. Inside, they found 14 people, men and women, huddled near burn barrels, the air thick with the smell of damp wood and ash. Some were too weak to stand, their limbs trembling from cold and malnutrition. Morales coordinated with EMS to move them out, the count bringing their total rescues to 33. Next was the feed plant on the outskirts of a farming town west of Rockford. The building was cavernous, its machinery coated in a fine layer of dust. In the far end, behind stacks of burlap sacks, they uncovered a hidden room with 11 more captives. They had no heat, just thin sleeping mats on a concrete floor, and most flinched at the sight of flashlights sweeping across the walls. That brought the total to 44. The motel on Route 6 came third. Its once bright sign was missing letters, the paint peeled away by years of wind and sun. The room smelled of mildew and decay, the carpets damp underfoot. In 3 of the units, they found 9 women locked inside, their belongings stuffed into plastic grocery bags as if ready to be moved at a moment's notice. The total climbed to 53. The last site that day was a farmstead north of Rockford, its paint stripped to bare wood and the barn leaning dangerously to one side. The smell of hay was faint, replaced by the sharp tang of ammonia. In the barn, 7 people were confined to makeshift stalls, rough plywood dividers with no doors, just heavy chains stretched across the openings. Among them was a woman in her late 20s, her hair the same light brown as Ellie and Grace. Her eyes went wide when she saw the twins' names on a clipboard Ryan carried, and she stumbled forward despite her weakness. "I'm their mother," she said, her voice raw. "I'm Maggie." She collapsed into Ryan's support, sobbing into his coat. Back in Rockford that evening, Emily sat with Maggie in the EMS tent, the twins curled up asleep against their mother's sides under thick blankets. Ace lay nearby, head resting on his paws but his eyes half open, always watching. Emily's camera was off. Some moments didn't belong on film. Ryan stood with Morales and Harmon by the operations board, marking off each rescued group in red marker. 60 people now safe. But more than half the dots on the map remained unvisited, and Ryan could feel the weight of every one of them. The operations board at the temporary command post was now crowded with red markings, each one a location from the map pulled from Lance Dorsey's backpack. Yet more than a third of the circles still remained unchecked. Morning brought clear skies but brittle air, the kind that seemed to carry sound farther, and urgency hung over the room like static. Sergeant Morales divided the remaining targets among 3 teams. Ryan and Ace would take the next 5 sites with Emily riding along to document strictly from the sidelines, though Ryan doubted she'd stay in the background if things turned. The first stop was an abandoned roadside diner 10 miles out on Highway 22. Its neon sign was shattered, the windows dusted with frost, and the parking lot littered with drifts of wind-blown trash. Inside, overturned booths and cracked vinyl seats lined the walls, the air thick with the smell of grease long gone rancid. Ace moved ahead, his nose leading him to the walk-in freezer in the back. The door was latched from the outside, a heavy bar wedged across it. When Ryan pried it open, 6 people blinked into the light, their breath misting in the cold air. A woman in her 50s, later identified as Marion Lee, had been trying to keep them warm with a pile of scavenged coats. Marion's lined face and steady voice gave her the air of someone who had been holding everyone else together, and she insisted the others be taken out first. From there, they drove to the old bus depot, now just a cracked asphalt lot with a boarded-up waiting room. Rows of lockers stood in the shadow of the main building, their paint peeling. Ace stopped at a cluster near the back, pawing at one of the doors. Ryan yanked it open to reveal a false back panel. Behind it, a cramped space held 8 people, knees drawn up from having been kept in the dark too long. One teen boy, Luis Ortega, barely 17, spoke up, saying he'd overheard talk of moving cargo through the fairgrounds tunnels. The maintenance tunnel at the county fairgrounds was their 3rd site. The fair had been defunct for years, the grounds overgrown and the rides rusting where they stood. The tunnel entrance was hidden beneath a panel in the main exhibition hall. Dust and cobwebs coated the narrow corridor, but Ace navigated without hesitation. At the far end, a locked cage held 5 people, all wearing thin festival volunteer shirts from years past as makeshift clothing. One of them, a wiry man in his 30s named Sean Brill, had been missing for over 2 months. His eyes shone with a mix of relief and disbelief when they freed him. Next came the self-storage facility on the edge of town. It was a cluster of metal units behind a chain-link fence, the padlock on the gate replaced by a cheap clip that snapped open with little effort. 4 people were found inside Unit 12, hidden behind a wall of stacked cardboard boxes. They'd been left with a single lantern and 2 gallons of water. One woman, Dana Miller, clutching her teenage daughter, asked first not about herself but whether the dog would be okay in the cold. Ace simply nosed her hand in reply. The last target that day was the office building of an abandoned quarry, its windows boarded and the front door sealed with plywood. They pried their way inside to find the lobby coated in a thin layer of stone dust. The smell of damp limestone lingered in the air. Upstairs, in what had once been a foreman's office, they discovered 8 more victims, all kept in a room where the windows had been painted over from the outside. Among them was Ivy Harrell, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had kept a mental record of conversations between their captors, including times, names, and references to someone she only knew as Victor. By the time the fifth extraction was complete, the sun had dipped low, washing the snowy horizon in streaks of pink and orange. 91 people had been rescued in total, a number that felt monumental and yet incomplete, because Victor Heller was still at large. As the last group was being loaded into the EMS vans, Emily stepped away to take a call. Her expression shifted from curious to wary, her free hand tightening on her coat. The male voice on the other end was calm, almost friendly, offering her an exclusive a full interview with someone close to Victor, in exchange for keeping the story out of official channels until they were done. "It'll make your career," the caller promised, "and all you have to do is play along." Emily's answer was firm. "No, I'm not for sale." She hung up before he could reply. She walked straight to Ryan, pulling a small recorder from her pocket. "Whoever it was knew about Victor. I recorded the call." Ryan studied her face for a moment, recognizing the decision she'd just made. A year ago, she might have taken the bait. Now she was choosing something else, something that might not fix the past, but would damn sure keep her from repeating it. Ace moved between them, pressing his shoulder lightly against Emily's leg as if marking the moment. The capture happened just before dawn. State troopers in the neighboring county had been monitoring highway cameras for a dark SUV matching the description given by Ivy Harrell. The vehicle was spotted traveling west toward the border of Wyoming, its plates partially obscured with mud. A short pursuit ended near an abandoned gas station, where the driver tried to flee on foot into a stretch of frost-covered scrubland. Victor Heller, once the polished face of a so-called charity, was pulled from the shadows wearing a tailored overcoat unsuited for the terrain, his graying hair slicked back, his expression a cold mix of defiance and resignation. He didn't say a word as he was cuffed, the frost in his breath the only sign of life in him. News of the arrest spread quickly back to Rockford, where the central square had been transformed overnight into a makeshift stage for what the townsfolk insisted was necessary, a gathering to acknowledge the ordeal, the survivors, and those who had brought them home. Strings of Christmas lights hung from lamppost to lamppost, casting a warm glow over the freshly cleared space. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, most already occupied by bundled figures clutching steaming cups of coffee. Ryan stood near the edge of the crowd, the collar of his coat turned up against the cold, scanning the faces. Many familiar from the rescues, some still pale and thin, but no longer hollow-eyed. Sergeant Morales was there too, her braid tucked under a knitted cap, speaking quietly with Deputy Harmon and Officer Delaney. Emily was near the stage, fussing with her camera tripod, the lenses gleaming under the soft light. She had spent the last week compiling her footage into a series of clean, factual reports free of embellishment, heavy on detail, careful with the dignity of the survivors. For someone once accused of chasing headlines, it was the purest kind of vindication. Her byline now carried weight again, but more importantly, it carried respect. Then there were Ellie and Grace. Bundled in matching navy coats, the twins stayed glued to their mother Maggie, who knelt between them with her arms wrapped tight, as though afraid they might vanish if she let go. Both girls' cheeks were pink from the cold, their hair brushed and neatly tied back with simple ribbons. Every so often, one of them would look up at their mother's face, as if to reassure themselves she was really there, and Maggie would answer with a kiss to the forehead, or a whispered word only they could hear. When the mayor, a broad-shouldered man named Howard Blakely, took the stage, his voice carried easily over the hush. Blakely was in his early 60s, his silver hair combed neatly back, a navy wool coat stretched across his frame. Known for his blunt manner and dislike of political flourish, he kept his remarks simple, thanking the deputies, the volunteers, and above all, the resilience of the rescued. Then he turned his gaze to where Ryan stood. "Deputy Ryan Cooper," Blakely said, "your actions and those of your team have brought 91 people out of the dark. We owe you a debt we can't repay, but we'll try." He gestured for Ryan to join him on stage. Ryan stepped forward reluctantly, Ace at his side, the crowd parting for them. Applause rose, not in a wave, but in a warm, sustained hum, like the sound of a hearth fire. Blakely handed Ryan a small plaque, the words, "For service above and beyond," engraved beneath the town's seal. "And to our four-legged hero," Blakely continued, turning toward Ace, "we name you an honorary citizen of Rockford." He produced a bright red scarf, knotting it gently around the shepherd's neck. Ace stood still, tail wagging once in a slow, measured sweep, as if acknowledging the gesture. After the formalities, the crowd dispersed into small clusters. Survivors reunited with distant relatives, volunteers swapped stories with deputies, coffee was refilled, and the scent of fresh-baked bread from a nearby bakery mingled with the crisp winter air. Emily caught up with Ryan near the stage steps. "You clean up all right," she teased lightly, her eyes soft. Ryan glanced down at Ace, who was sitting between Ellie and Grace now. The twins were giggling, stroking his fur, the red scarf bright against his dark coat. Snow had begun to fall again, fine flakes settling in his fur and catching on the curve of his left ear, the one that still drooped from an old wound. He lifted his head, watching the sky with the calm, steady gaze of a sentry who knew his watch was never truly over. Maggie joined them, her arm around her daughter's, her expression a mix of joy and disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly to Ryan, her voice trembling. "You just did," he replied simply, nodding toward the twins, whose laughter was now carrying in the cold air. As the lights from the square glowed brighter against the encroaching dusk, the scene felt suspended in time, a moment of warmth carved out from the cold, a reminder that even in a place as small as Rockford, darkness could be pushed back if enough hands and hearts worked together. Ace shifted his weight, leaning slightly into Ellie's side, his eyes still scanning the edges of the square. And though the town would sleep easier that night, Ryan knew, just as Ace seemed to, that vigilance was the quiet price of peace. In the end, this story is more than a rescue. It is a reminder that even in the coldest winters of life, God can send light through unexpected messengers. Sometimes that messenger wears a badge, sometimes it walks on four legs with a scar and a watchful eye. What happened in Rockford shows that no darkness is too deep for His grace to reach, and no soul is too lost to be found. In our daily lives, we might not be chasing criminals or pulling people from danger, but we all face moments when someone needs our courage, our kindness, or our voice. That is where miracles begin, in the choice to act, to love, to protect. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others can be reminded that hope is never gone. Leave a comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more stories like this, and pray with us for the safety of all who watch. Type Amen in the comments if you believe God still works miracles today, and that every life, human or animal, is precious in His eyes. Hoy ChatGPT.